chair of the committee. Obviously, everybody in the room knows that, but for anybody who's joining us, we will be webcasting. Welcome to everybody, including any members of the public, if they're only watching us this afternoon. And today's meeting will be run using the webcasting system via Microsoft Teams. Committee members and key officers are physically present in the Council Chamber at Brimton Way in Yeovil today. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or observe. And this meeting, of course, is being webcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. There may be a slight delay between agenda items. The pack is available via ModGov or directly from the Council website from the link which was sent out to members. When you're invited to speak, please could you speak clearly into the microphone and state who you are for the benefit of anybody who's not in the room, who's listening to the meeting, so they can identify who is speaking. And of course, this meeting will be audio recorded. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers if they wish to do so from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. First item on the agenda today is apologies for absence. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Christine Lawrence, who's been substituted by Sue Osborne, but I believe Sue's not arrived yet. And we've got Councillor Hugh Davies and Councillor Stephen Pugsley joining online.
Do members of the committee have any other apologies or substitutions? Sorry. We've heard from Helen. Helen is on her way, and we're expecting her to join us in the room, isn't she? So we do know that she's got a transport issue at the moment, but she will be joining us as soon as possible. So number 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting of Constitution and Governance Committee, pages 9 to 16. To confirm the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of August, and if agreed for the Chair to sign the minutes as a correct record. Do we have any comments on the minutes, or are we happy for somebody to propose and second them as a true record of what took place? The proposal of Councillor Wilkins, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All those in favour of treating that as a true record? That is carried. Moving on to item number 3, declarations of interest. Members will be invited to declare any interest regarding any matters on the agenda and to specify the nature of that interest. And we'll be highlighting to the meeting the standard declarations of panel members in relation to their membership of town and parish councils, which of course are standardly published on our website. Any other interests which any member, either in the room or who's joining us hybridly on Teams, who wishes to share with us? Okay. Item number 4 is public question time. There's been no formal submissions for statements or questions received by the deadline, which was last Thursday, the 12th of October, at 5 p.m. Does anybody else wish to make any public questions? Okay. Okay, and item number 5, the first meeting item on the agenda is the Constitution. There's an update on the review, and I'm going to invite Scott Wardridge to introduce the report, including the agenda pack. And I'd particularly like members to start focusing on, we'll be proposed to set up 3 potential working groups, of which the first one, we'll be looking for 5 members of this committee to join the Constitution Working Group, Council Procedures, and to appoint a chair of that group. And by all means, if people want to come forward to be a member of that group, but I anticipate that we might not be able to fill that today, and it'll be given opportunity for people to email myself and Claire and or David after this meeting to sort of nominations and volunteers to join that group, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, Scott, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome everybody. Hopefully the report on page 17 of your agenda pack again helps just set the scene. Many of you will know, certainly I can see from around the room, many of you were members of the former Constitution and Governance Committee that were involved as part of the oversight and the development of the Council's Constitution. Hopefully you'll see we've got a bit of a supporting presentation as well, just to highlight some of the key points from that supporting paper. Again, some people, it's useful just to reference that you'll know as part of the development of the Constitution. One, we took a lot of time looking at other unitary councils, what we saw as peer councils, as comparables, as well as the Somerset 5 legacy councils when developing and designing the Constitution. And I think it's probably fair to say the one council that was used as, I think, the greatest extent was Buckinghamshire Council and their constitution in terms of a new constitution for our new Somerset Council. I think that's just important just to reference. I think the key point, and obviously you can see it's self-evident today, is that commitment that was also given very early on, which was that recognising the pace with which we developed the new constitution, and in particular, I think, you know, we tried as best as we could, certainly as officers, to involve as many members as we could with the various interests, whether it's interests in planning, licensing, whether it's interested in terms of some of the standards work or some of the other committees. We tried as best as possible to get that sort of member feedback involvement in the design, but I think we also recognise that certainly in terms of when you're designing something that doesn't actually exist, you need to recognise that once the council's formed and operating, it's important to review the sort of practical application of the Constitution. So this very much is giving that update around the commitment that was given, that we do just that. But I think for me, and I know also David, one of the important bits that we're particularly keen to do is to make sure we get that greater member buy-in as part of that review. That's really critical. So the next part, again, is just to update in terms of the scope. Many of you will recognise and hopefully not be surprised in terms of some of the key areas. You'll appreciate the Constitution itself runs to about 570 pages, so we're not proposing a page-by-page review, but what we are proposing, though, is some focus. We know in terms of full council procedure rules, certainly in terms of how that's operating. I think what we've picked up on in particular, certainly in the first 6 months of the council's operation, is the need to focus around both the member questions that arise at full councils, but also in terms of the public question time as well. One of the things that exists in a number of the legacy councils was a lot more detail about the public question time procedures. That's something that's not necessarily as full as it should be in terms of our constitution. So again, there's an area there around, we think that we need to do more looking at the speaking arrangements at the meetings and how they also apply at the committees. We know that, again, there was a commitment given around the planning committees, both the strategic and the 4 area-based, particularly around their terms of reference, just making sure how they operate. Is it still in line with what members' wishes were? So there's an area there recognising that particular scope. There's also one similarly about the licensing and regulatory and the 4 area-based licensing subs and 4 area-based regulatory subs as well, taking the same opportunity just to see in practice how they work. Similarly, we also know that in terms of the scheme of delegation and decision making, and there's a few more slides later on this about that work, there was again a need to also make sure that also is fit for purpose in how it's operating. And again, there's some reference as well just to some of our core procedure rules around financial regs and contract procedure rules. So the approach to the review, as the Chair's already outlined, and you'll see hopefully front and centre, one of the things that I think we strive for but didn't quite get there as best as we could, but this time we're looking to remedy, is a series of working groups. Now, I've sort of quickly danced through some very hard-hitting pages in terms of numbers and areas of complexity around that list on that previous slide. If we were to try and do that through one working group, I'd suggest that's quite a mammoth task, again, just for a single group. And I think one of the things in balance is also recognising there was a very strong commitment given around the experience of both the planning chairs and the vice chairs and how we can build on that as a good working group. Think of it as subject matter experts. And then similarly in terms of licensing as well. I think there's opportunities there around how we look at the licensing and regulatory activity. So one of the approaches to the review that we're certainly recommending is working with officers is to have 3 working groups, very much similar to what members may see as almost like a scrutiny task and finish. Very focused, looking at the existing terms of reference, the existing arrangements in the Constitution, and highlighting in areas, are there any issues? Are there any reasons for change? What are they and what are the options and proposals? And then for those constitution working groups to then make recommendations back to this committee at ideally around its January cycle. And that will help feature then into that part of the annual review. The outline of those 3 working groups hopefully is just set out on that slide as well as within the report. One focusing very much in terms of council procedures, one around the planning committees and another one around the licensing and regulatory. And you can see from that slide the proposed and suggested membership of those working groups and the support that's then provided by officers. But also just a reminder of timing, because again, it's not long before January, and again, just around them working through some of those areas. And in an outline form, Chair, that's the real summary of the update. I'm really open to members just to receive your views on the proposals.
Thank you very much, Scott, for that very thorough sort of introduction to the proposed reviews. And I think it really focuses the mind. Yes, January seems a long time off, but it's not, is it? You know, and so these working groups do need to get set up and constituted as soon as possible. There's quite a bit of work to be done if we're to report back for our January sort of meeting. Any councillors, which councillors would like to open up and open up on this one and actually make any comment to that? Councillor Bailey. Sorry to be pedantic, John. I mean, I know who you are, John, but when everybody, just a reminder, when everybody speaks, if they could just introduce themselves, because obviously for the benefit of the people who actually joining us.
Shall I do that again?
No, that's fine. No. Okay. Scott, would you like to try and pick that one up?
It was there. Again, yeah, I mean, happy to look in certainly in terms of that area, happy to pick that up as well as part of the work.
Anybody else like to? Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. I know within 1-2 of the paper that it said the Constitution and Governance provides a steer to officers ahead of any proposals. With the makeup of some of your working groups with chairs, I'm talking about planning, you're talking about chairs and that expertise, it's just ensuring that as it's the duty of the Constitution and Governance that they are also included so that they are part of that steer to officers. That's sort of in the guidance. And my second question was slightly off kilter, I suppose, but in our audit committee there were several questions raised, and I thought a note was going to go to yourself, Chair, asking whether there could be a review of the papers and how the template, and I thought that might actually fit with this piece of work, but I wasn't sure if it would fit in line with Constitution work or sit outside of it.
I was aware that the discussions took place at audit. I haven't viewed that, but one of the members of audit has said that it's on its way to myself to get that looked at, so I was aware it's coming. So we can I chat to officers about where that report is sitting, you know, that request, and how we take that forward. But thank you for the reminder.
I wasn't sure whether it would be part of this work. That's why I'm asking.
God, sorry.
I mean, it's related to the work. This one, the work that we're talking about here is very specific in terms of the Constitution. So the specific recommendations from audit relate much more in terms of the report templates and the supporting information that goes principally before the executive, because the business cases in question are mainly related to key decisions, which are executive functions. So it's certainly something we are looking at and we're addressing, but it's not spelt out in terms of the Constitution. So it's not directly part of the constitutional review, but we've not lost sight of it. We are picking it up as part of the work on decision-making arrangements that Dave is going to talk about in a moment.
Thank you. I didn't want to miss that sort of annual opportunity. Thank you.
Mandy. Councillor Pugsley's online, wants to talk. Thank you. Mute, Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Sorry, we've just got a bit of an IT glitch here at the moment, so if you could pause just for a moment, because we're not hearing you in the room. We'll give you a thumbs up when you can come through. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Stephen, do you want to try again? Can you try and...
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you very much for being patient.
Okay.
No, not at all. Thank you, Chairman. I was just saying that I think that the proposed working groups are very sensible. They should be able to wrap up most of the knotty issues that have arisen since the Constitution was adopted. And if it's of any help, I'm happy to serve on either the Council Procedures Group or the Planning Group. I will, however, say that my experience is far too limited to serve on the licensing and regulatory one, so I will leave that to people with much more experience than me.
Very much for that kind offer, Stephen. Obviously, we are looking for two of the groups to be constituted would support the setting up of the working group, so other committees will be constituting the membership of that group. So the big focus for us is to have support the proposal for setting up two of the groups, and actually in our hands is to nominate 5 members of the committee, of this committee, to the Constitution Working Group, the one that looks at procedures. Thank you very much, Stephen, for coming forward. Councillor.
Sorry, just looking at that slide, I just wanted clarity. Are you looking for members for the planning? Because it doesn't actually say how many you're looking for the planning committee on the slide.
Just had a pre-conversation, a couple of pre-conversations with officers on that one. I think the remit of the committee today is we're looking to support the setting up of the proposals for the planning committee constitution working group and a separate one for licensing and regulatory, and then those committees would form the membership of that. But the one that we are looking to fill ourselves is the first one, which is the council procedures constitution working group. Yes, that's the one. We'll be supporting the opening setting up of the other two, but the membership of the committees, those other committees, will form the membership of those two other working groups. So it's for us to, we could need to set up one and support the proposal of setting up numbers 2 and 3. I think that's right. Next. The clerk.
Thank you, Chairman. Barry Clark, Mendip Central and East. It's apposite that Scott's been talking about this because I've had various correspondence over the last couple of months about changes that we would propose for the planning committees, specifically the planning committees. I don't know if you want me to run through the changes that we would propose now, but it involves altering the wording of some clauses, and it actually also involves considering speaking time of members of division or divisional members who may not be part of the planning committee but have a voice to say on the grounds that they know more intimately than anybody else the details that are going to a particular planning committee. So there are actually 3 items. One is so pedantic, I'm not going to mention it really, but I am going to mention it because in the description it talks about its membership, and it's an apostrophe S and not its membership. So, I mean, it matters nothing until a legal beagle gets hold of it, Scott. Then we've got a problem. So, do you want me to actually detail you now what those changes are, or do you want to leave it until we go to the planning committee review working group? I'm keen that we get to the review with all this having been discussed, not get to the review and somebody says, well, we have plenty of time, but we didn't actually talk about it.
This is something you're really passionate about, and that's really, really good. It's up to the committee, but I think we prefer if we sort of aired those views at the appropriate time. I'm not saying this is inappropriate, and I think your views will be really, really important at that review in terms of the working group of the planning committee, and particularly a big focus on our agenda for the January meeting will be the review of the planning committee process, and I think that's the right apposite time to sort of air those views. But that's not to decry your views. I know that's something you've got a really passionate interest in, and that's good. We want to have lots of people with lots of interest in it.
I am ready to volunteer for the planning committee review working group.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you. The room who wishes to speak on this one. Do we have anybody who wants to? Sorry. Oh, Councillor Seeb. Peter Seeb. Hi.
Hello. Yes, I think I'm able. Can you hear me now?
Peter. No longer hear you now. Is it Peter muted, or is it? Sorry? Peter, I'm ever so sorry. You've muted yourself again. We started hearing you, and then you've gone on mute.
How about now?
Yes, that's fine. You're loud and clear.
Okay, apologies. My microphone is out of sync with the computer I'm working on. The question with respect to working groups, are you intending to either have planning members as part of the working group? I'm thinking particularly about the chairs and the lead, or are you intending to have them just turn up to give evidence?
Thank you, Peter. Scott's going to try and answer that one for you.
And probably, if I could just ask if we just go back a slide, because this may just help everyone. Just remind us in terms of the proposals are, so if we just take the middle one, because I know there's been some reference to the planning committees. So the proposal is that we establish a working group. Its membership is made up of all the chairs and vice chairs of the 5 planning committees, along with the lead member for economy, planning and assets. That's the working group. That working group will work with officers, and then proposals from that working group will be brought to a joint workshop of that working group and members of this committee in December, ahead of any final proposals coming to the committee in January. So that's the proposal for planning, and in part that approach is replicated as well for licensing and regulatory as well, in the sense that the working group is made up of just members drawn from the licensing and regulatory committee, together with the relevant lead member working with officers, and the proposals that come out of that working group are then taken to a joint workshop.
Next person I've got speaking is Simon Coles, who's joining us online. Next person we've got is actually in the room, Helen Kay. Hi Helen, how are you? I hope your car travails are sorted out now.
All right, thank you very much, and I am sorry, everybody. I've got a tyre that's going flat. I just wanted to check. I have read the papers before the meeting. Is there a way that we can make written submissions to that working group? I've been talking to my parish councils and town council, who have made some suggestions for how they think the constitution could be improved and how the procedure, particularly for referrals, could be improved. And there are a number of things in section 8 of the planning constitution which, as somebody who has a maths A-level and did a COBOL programming course years ago, I still find very difficult to follow the logic within it. And know exactly how the referral process works myself. So I would like to make a written submission into that group for it to be considered before those recommendations come back in December. Is that possible? Thank you.
Scott.
I mean, yes, but I'd certainly encourage all members, if you've got any specific ideas, suggestions, feedback, comments, by all means send them through to myself and David, and we'll incorporate that as part of the review.
Richard Wilkins.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on this joint workshop, clearly Councillor Clark and Councillor Kay would be very interested in taking part. I know I would be. I'm pretty sure that most members here would have an interest in that working group. Is there a limit of the amount of people, or can pretty much the entirety of this committee take part?
I've been asked to nominate 5, but Scott will give some clarity on the numbers.
So again, if we're talking about the planning committee working group, again, if I just focus us on that, what we're so what we're proposing in terms of the recommendations from that working group is that a joint workshop is held in December. That workshop would have attending, as in invitations, all of the planning chairs and vice chairs and the lead member, and all of the members of this committee would be invited to that workshop in December.
Useful, Scott. Martin Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Martin Lovell. At every planning meeting I've been to, I'm on Planning East, I've been grilled about feedback from the meeting, had to put it in writing, and at pain of death if I left the room without completing it and handing it in. To my way of thinking, this review should be quite a simple job for those designated to do, that is the chairs and vice chairs and officers, because all the data that they need will be in front of them, provided myself and by everybody else. I trust that's been consistent across the other 3 planning committees as well. But meantime, until before then, we have meetings in November and December, all of which will give plenty of opportunity for feedback onto those forms. So I'm just trying to think of a way of not complicating the thing too much. That's why I would particularly recommend that we don't necessarily extend the membership of the planning group, because I think the information is all there for them to be able to get on with it.
Thank you. It's a really useful point, Martin, as well. And I think there's a huge amount of anecdotal evidence of people attending the planning committee meetings, giving their feedback at the end of each meeting, which should be really, really valuable in terms of shaping a way forward on this one. Next one is Dawn Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check, there was a public consultation on planning. How is that feeding into the process?
Yes, there was. It's certainly in terms of a number of meetings, there's been opportunities for people attending that, whether they're agents, applicants, members of the public, to complete a survey, and we've been gathering feedback on that. So that the analysis of that feedback is being presented through to that working group, also to take account of the other stakeholders in this process.
Mandy Chilcott.
Thank you very much, Mandy Chilcott Minehead. I admitted that earlier, Chair. Just coming back really to that initial 1.2, that this committee provides a steer to officers ahead of any proposals. My concern is, I guess, looking at what you're suggesting today, is I really feel quite strongly we should have 1 or 2 people on both of those working groups to have that link back to this committee. And for me, that's a missing with what you're suggesting in order for us to do what we're meant to be here to do. Thank you, Chair.
Scott.
I mean, I take the point. I mean, I know, well, hopefully Councillor Carswell doesn't mind me speaking for him. He's certainly the chair of the Licensing and Regulatory Main Strategic Committee. In terms of other members, which is then only really the planning one, I suppose to me it's just that acknowledgement and hopefully that assurance that with, and I'm trying to calculate in my head, but effectively with 10 chairs and vice chairs who I know they will have a very good idea, certainly of views from yourselves, both in the committee, but I think the assurance piece was that one around the workshop being held in December for all of the members of this committee to be able to also put forward views. That was the assurance piece in terms of how this committee has an opportunity to feed into the work of that planning constitution working group. I think initially though, I think it's just also think about where did some of this start. Some of this started with a recognition and a commitment of, for want of a better phrase, empowering the actual committees themselves to do some work themselves first on the initial proposals and then engage with constitution and governments. So that's why that's what's the the ethos behind these proposals, is actually recognising let's work with the planning committee chairs and vice chairs, and similarly let's work with the licensing and regulatory on that initial feedback review, and then have the joint workshop with all the members of this committee.
It's in Wales joining us online. Martin, hi, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Yes, I came rather late to this, so my question may be not right, but do I gather that the workshops suggested, joint workshops, are only going to be for committee members and chairman and vice chairman? If that is the case, what input, apart from filling in a form every meeting and putting in boxes, what about planning members? What input are you expecting or having from the members of the planning committee, apart from the chair and the vice chair?
I mean, I would hope that the planning chairs and vice chairs would have a good awareness of the views of their committee in terms of contributions from other members. We are, as I say, capturing the information from all the various surveys, but again, there are opportunities, certainly when these proposals come back through this committee, for all members, as in all 110 members, to play a part in feeding in their views as well. I mean, ultimately, any final proposals relating to changes to the Constitution will be the subject of a paper to full council. So I think what I would highlight is there are opportunities for members, whether they're planning committee members or all members who may not be members of these committees, to still have an input at various stages.
Will the workshops be team meetings, so anyone who, like myself now, can attend and have an input if necessary?
We're getting nods for David and for Scott on that one. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Got a couple of people who want to come back a second time, but what I want to do is actually bring in people who haven't spoken first, and I will revisit the people who haven't got their hands up. I've got a list of them all. The next one is Sue Osborne. You're joining us online. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Ross. Sorry I'm not with you in person. I think I sort of had yet another venue mixed up, but there you go. Martin beat me to it on one of my questions, which was how do rank and file planning committee members feed in? Because I think our views are every bit as valuable as the chair and vice chairs. And I think there are particular issues in Area South which I think make it important that members do have a chance to feed in at an earlier rather than a later stage into proposals, because it's much harder to change things further down the line than what it is now. The other bit to return back to, and you may well have covered this, and apologies, so please indulge me, Chair, is one of the things that came out of our regeneration forum yesterday was the position of the regeneration boards that were formerly part of South Somerset and where they now stand, because apparently they haven't met and they appear to have been downgraded to outside bodies when actually they were decision-making bodies of Somerset, South Somerset District Council. Where does that sit in your review, and what are the plans for those regeneration boards? Because there was a feeling of real anger from the two members who sat on those regeneration boards in Chard that they were just being completely sidelined and maybe even being dropped by the back door.
Sue, Scott, do you want to? Sorry. Thanks, Sue. Scott, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe the boards in question there form part of a schedule of outside bodies, internal groups and other boards which the council received appointments to at its AGM in May. Hopefully members may recall as well, as part of making those appointments, of which there are approximately 350 member appointments as part of that, to what are about 157 outside internal and partnership bodies. That very same report gave a commitment that there would be a review of those appointments, as in the work of those boards, which will be reported back to the council by its next AGM, so by May 2024. So again, it's a bit like the point that Mandy's raised. It is on our radar. There is a piece of work being done relating to outside internal and partnership boards, but it's not part of the constitution review because those boards in question aren't actually detailed in the constitution. They don't form part of it in that sense, but they are being reviewed, and there will be a report back through to council ahead of May 2024. And clearly, as part of that process, we will want to make sure that all the members who are appointed to all the various boards have an opportunity to feed in their views and are aware of any proposals before they come back to council.
Scott, I'm going to get back to the couple of people who raised their hands a second time. I've already got you. I've got Dawn there as well. But Simon Carswell.
Thank you, Chair. Simon Carswell, representing Street. Where the makeup of the planning committee group is quite clear, I think there'll be no lack of volunteers for that working group. The licensing group, it's not so clear as to who those members would be, and I'd like to think that the chair and vice chair of licensing would be part of those 5. And when do we set the date and decide who is going to be on that committee? Who's that? Are invites going to go out? What's the arrangement?
I guess presumably, Tim's just whispered on my ear, he just said, I guess they've got to have licensing training to go on to that one. Is that right, Scott? And then obviously picking up Simon's points as well.
They have. I mean, the proposal for the working group in relation to licensing and regulatory is that the 5 members are drawn from the 15 members that make up the licensing and regulatory. I suppose for us being quite open, at this point, we brought the proposal to this committee to say, are you supportive of that approach, before we've moved to then actually working directly with licensing and regulatory to identify the 5. So I'd suggest that if this committee is supportive of that approach, the very next steps would be working with the chair and the vice chair to identify which 5 members would like to be involved in that work.
Go back and call on some of the members who've spoken once already. Helen Kay.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the second bite at the cherry. I want to just say about the questionnaires that we've all been filling out at Planning Board. You only answer the questions that are there in front of you. It doesn't cover everything. It generally covers how did the meeting go, did the chair it well, etc. It doesn't actually address lots of things in the Constitution. So, for example, as I say, some of the parishes I've spoken to have said that they don't like the idea that they've got to either support or object. It means they can't have a neutral stance anymore, where they used to say it would be okay if this, that and the other, which often then can lead to a dialogue with the developer or applicant to improve their application. So there are things like that we could improve on, and there are other things as well, like it's not clear exactly if the officer disagrees with the ward member or the parish council, exactly how long they've got to discuss that, and the role of the chair. Sometimes the chair can come in a bit too early and say, well, I don't think this needs to go to planning board, before the ward members or divisional members had an opportunity to say what they think. So there are certain other things that are not to do with the meetings, but are more to do with the process, and some of those things are not even in the Constitution. So we need to look at those. I've asked twice to have this planning review, and I thought that's what we were going to be discussing at this meeting. What we are talking about is a process for the planning review, not the actual planning review itself. And I would like to support what Councillor Chilcott said about having a couple of members from this committee to go, looking at the constitutional side of it, to go on to this working party, because the chairs and the vice chairs are going to be seeing it from a particular perspective, which is about running meetings. They're not necessarily going to be seeing it from the members' perspective. So I'd just like, if necessary, to make a proposal, if that's required. I don't know if we need a seconder for that. I don't know what other people think.
I'm guessing the chairs and the vice chairs, I'm looking at Scott, the chairs and the vice chairs will form membership of the committee, but were there other opportunities for ordinary members of planning committees across the county to join that group as well?
Other than their feedback that they've already provided directly, no, we're proposing, like most of the working groups, to keep it quite tight in terms of focus. I mean, I think there could be something, it's a bit like we talked about with the workshop. Certainly we can look at other opportunities for, effectively for observers in that sense, but I think experience shows that some of the more productive work can be done with a much smaller group of members, which is why we try to keep those working groups at a certain size. But we've also balanced that with the workshops to then allow a much more broader involvement as part of the process before any final proposals come back to this committee. I suppose for us, it's only as officers, it's about just trying and strike a balance that members feel comfortable with and feel supportive of. So clearly that's one of the steers we're looking from yourselves today.
Richard Wilkins. No, no, I'm sorry, my mistake. Barry Clark. I do apologise. I'm going to come to you, Richard. I promise.
Thank you, Chairman. The point about that Martin made earlier on about all the feedback is available from these planning meetings. I'm not sure it's 100% correct, because they generally ask you, were the visuals all right? Was the sound all right? Did the chair take note of your comments? And it was more to do with the domestics of the meeting than it was about the procedure that should be adopted at any of those meetings. And the other thing, if I could just ask Scott, please, Chair, we're going to have a meeting in November and then a joint workshop with the C&G committee in December. If this is going off for rubber stamping in January, is there enough time for everybody to debate this and have their say? Or are we going to be fed, well, you've all said this is what I decided, and this is what I think we're going to do?
I'm not sure. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure rubber stamping is the right word. That's the opportunity. It's always been planned in the forward plan that January was the meeting where we were bringing forward the discussion about the review of the planning committee processes. And this, what we're setting up these working groups, is a big part of the process to form evidence to guide us in terms when we have that discussion in January, and also the feedback from members attending the individual planning committee boards. I hear what you're saying, that some of it has been quite process-led, but I think there was, I filled those forms, and there was opportunities to actually make comments, wasn't there, regarding the planning committee meetings itself on there. Dawn Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm quite happy to leave this in the hands of the chairs and vice chairs of the planning committees. I think I certainly would feel confident that they'd represent my views from having sat on planning committees, and that they are aware of some of the little bits and pieces that maybe need tweaking. I'm just wondering, in terms of moving this forward, whether a suggestion is that we write to all members and ask them to provide feedback to Scott of anything they would like to be raised at those meetings, so that all members have that opportunity to raise their concerns if they have any, and then everybody's voice has been heard.
That's a really useful suggestion, I think. I certainly would be supportive of that, and I will come back to that when we draw together the recommendations. Sue Osborne, you have your hand raised. Did you want to come back, or is that a historic hand? I wasn't sure if you lowered
No,
it
it
last
is
time.
not. I can assure you it is not a historic hand.
By all means, go ahead. You're most welcome.
Thank you. I certainly would have liked, had I been in the room, to have seconded Helen's proposal, because I believe it has a lot of merit, and I do think the consultation needs to go to active planning committee members, if nothing else. I'm not totally convinced that vice chairs and vice chairs, for the reasons given, are necessarily going to reflect the views of wider communities, and certainly even of their wider members. So if Helen wants to make a proposal, I'm happy to second it. And also, as well, there is merit in Dawn's suggestion that maybe you do a member survey or something. The "how was it for you, darling" forms that you send out at the moment are not fit for the purpose that you are now trying to use them for.
Okay, I wouldn't have put it like that, but I hear what you're saying, Sue. But each to their own. Okay, but I think Helen, I think, is going to move a proposal, but I just need to remind everybody in terms of the process, because although, Sue, you are down as a official substitute for this meeting, but because you're not in the actual room, you're not actually physically able to second any proposal that's coming forward.
In the review as a substitute member if required. So yeah, I hope someone else will second Helen's proposal, because I think it does have real merit.
And Sue, your views are absolutely most welcome. Thank you very much for your contribution. I just needed to point out the process procedural issue, that just a general reminder that only people who can vote on items, if there are indeed any votes or anybody who can propose or second any amendments or changes or motions, they have to be in the room. Okay, so the next one is quite a lot of people want to speak to this one. Tim, you haven't spoken before.
Thank you, Chair. Tim Curley, Somerton. I've heard what everyone is saying, and I came into the room a little bit worried that the perspective of a member of planning may be different from a chair or a vice chair, and were we giving them sufficient voice? Two things. First of all, that question was answered by the fact that we have workshops. The question, though, is the quality of those workshops and the level of feedback that goes through. Yeah, so I think the other issue that we also have is that committee is already going to be up to 11, and we know that the higher we go, the worse the decision-making tends to be. And I think they say, anything over 15, you're never going to make a decent decision. So I don't want to overload it. I think 11 is probably the right number. And to me, it comes down to the quality of the workshop and the member involvement of whether we get that voice in. So I hear what has been said. I don't entirely agree that we should front-load the working group, though. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and I will make some comments on this, but there's 2 or 3 people still want to speak. Richard Wilkins has been waiting very, very patiently, and then John Bailey hasn't spoken at all. Richard and then John Bailey.
Okay. Councillor Richard Wilkins, Curry Rival and Langport Division. I fully understand the feeling that we should be in the initial part of the looking into this, but I will caution against it because I've got very different views from every other person sat in this room, and unless every single person is there at the first part, it will not work. I mean, that's too big. So I think that we have to agree that the joint workshop is the place where we put our point of view in, because I know that if we just put one person from this onto the initial one, it will be very different to what I think. That's my point of view.
Thank you, Richard. John Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. John Bailey, member from Martock. I thought I was quite clear in my initial question to Scott and his answer. Thank you, Scott. But after the conversations that have gone on, I just want to reinforce some of the comments that have been made. I think there's a confusion between membership of a committee and involvement of people who might have an input. That one wants to be restricted for obvious reasons. The other is important that everyone's involved in that process. I'm going to focus on planning just for a second to reinforce my point, and it's one that's been made by Sue Osborne, Dawn and Helen here, is that I think one of our stated objectives is to be a listening council. And if I have to say, in terms of planning, I think it's not fit for purpose in that basis. And I make that comment from the point of view of a member and also from residents. And I'm aware that we've lost a tier, and they're reflecting on what that's like and how they were involved. But I think we need to pull these points in to any sort of conversation, any way that we go forward. So I would just like to see formalised the involvement of members in the process. I think a suggestion that Helen raised and certainly Dawn did, in some sort of formal process. So people are asked to reply with their comments by a certain timescale, which fits in with all the rest of the time. And then if they don't, well, they don't. But I think at the moment, hoping that people might come back, and if they're not aware of it and we're all busy, then perhaps we might miss a few comments or thoughts. I've been pretty hard-hitting on planning, so I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. I like the idea of the all-members survey. I'm looking around the room. I'm not picking up the vibes that anybody would defer from supporting that. And I think it's a good opportunity for all members to have ownership and equal sort of input into that process. I really, really like that. Dawn and then Mandy Chilcott.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone there was a public planning consultation that I know my parish council participated in, and it should have been highlighted to all parish councils that process was happening, and they have had an opportunity to feed into this consultation already. I think to cover that, if all members can ensure that they submit the views of the people they represent by the process I originally suggested, where every member is invited to submit issues or any ideas they have, would cover that off, because that member could then have those discussions with their parishes and make sure that everybody has been represented at yet another level, although that opportunity has been there for parish councils and residents over the last few months to participate in a public consultation.
Chilcott.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm going back to my initial point. This committee, not all councillors, are here to provide a steer to officers ahead of any proposals being brought. So my question remains, how is this committee steering the officers ahead of proposals? Because my understanding is the working group will do their work, the proposals will then come and be discussed, and then it will come here. So it's a really fundamental question. Unless you have someone from this committee or two, as part of that working group, how are they steering the officers ahead of any proposals coming forward? And I second your proposal.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I think we've had a really thorough debate on this, and I think there's been a good exchange of views, and I think it's about time that we actually tested this through the democratic process and put this to a vote. I think there's general acceptance that everybody likes the idea of an all-members survey. I think that's right, isn't it? So, looking at members that are in the room, we have a proposal from Councillor Kay, seconded by Councillor Chilcott.
We have that worded, please.
Thanks. Helen, would you like to word your proposal? And then Mandy, let us know if you're acceptable of the words.
I would be happy for Mandy to do it, to make the proposal, and I will second it, because you seem to have more of a grip on it. Mandy, would you do that?
Thank you.
Mandy.
My proposal is in line with the Constitution and Governance Committee guidance, and in order to provide a steer to officers ahead of any proposals being brought, that 2 members of this committee are part of the Constitution Review Working Group. I think that's the planning, yes.
Okay. Really, really conscious that, and it's fine, absolutely fine if people bring forward, members bring forward ideas, so I just want to make sure that we all understand what we're voting for. I know David's furious the wrong word, has been feverishly writing away there. David, if you could give us, or Scott could repeat that back so all members, we all understand what we're voting for, and I will put it to a vote. No, that's fine, but no, just, and I'm not trying to cause trouble, just so we make sure we got it right. And it's for Mandy's benefit as well, that what is being voted on is exactly encapsulates what you were trying to get across.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think I've got it. So I believe the proposal is that in line with the Constitution and Governance Committee's guidance, that this committee, to give a steer to officers before any proposals come forward, that 2 members of the Constitution and Governance Committee are added to the Constitution Review Working Group planning committees alongside the chairs and vice chairs and the lead member for Economic Development Planning and Assets.
Are you happy that encapsulates what you were trying to say?
Thank you, perfect.
Excellent, thank you. So we have that proposal, which has been read out, moved by Councillor Chilcott and read out by David, and seconded by Councillor Kay. All those in favour of that proposal? And those against? Okay. In that case, then, I will move... expecting to get one of these, yeah. I had this once on planning committee as well, but that was over a planning application. So I'm going to actually move with the officer's recommendation and actually support the officer's recommendation on that one. Dawn Johnson.
On the basis of that decision, can I make a proposal that we ask all members to seek the opinion of their parishes and ensure that every member is given the opportunity to report to this committee in some formal way?
For that.
A second is just a question. Some parishes in Somerset only have quarterly meetings, so they probably won't even have a meeting before the feedback's needed.
Opportunity for members to engage with the parish councils and actually say this is coming forward, and can have an opportunity, perhaps they can have an email forum and then come back, or give an opportunity for parish council members to come forward with their views. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have formally meet to come forward with views. Individual parish councillors can engage with that process and email in their views, couldn't they? Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just a suggestion, just building on the debate today. I just wonder whether perhaps the proposer is more focused in terms of the committee requesting that officers undertake a survey of all 110 members regarding their views on the planning committee's terms of reference. Because it's quite specific. I'm just picking up the suggestions very much around ensuring that all 110 members are given an opportunity to comment upon the terms of reference.
I'm happy with that. Absolutely happy with that.
Yeah, it's fine. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Kay. All those in favour? And hands raised so Claire can count them. You okay, Claire? And any against? Any abstentions? Is that abstention, Randy? Okay, fine, thank you. Same recommendation, which is the committee is asked to provide feedback and views on the proposed approach to review, which we have. Nominate 5 members of the committee to the Constitutional Working Group, which can council procedures and appoint a chair of that working group. And as I said at the outset, would that be possible members find favour with us emailing into myself as the chair and Tim as the vice chair and David and Claire for at a very early opportunity for members to come forward who want to serve on that group. And then 3, we support the proposals for the Constitutional Working Group on planning and its proposed membership as set out in the presentation. And finally, 4, sorry? As amended, of course, yes, as amended, with the survey which Scott has outlined via Dawn's suggestion, and which was supported and voted on. And 4, support the proposals for the Constitutional Working Group, Licensing and Regulatory Committee, and the proposed membership as set out in the presentation. Do we have a proposer? Councillor Curley. You second it, Emily? Yeah. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That is carried. Thank you very much. It was an interesting debate, and I think there is a will for everybody. Everybody wants this review to take place, and everybody wants it to be all-encompassing, and for members to have an equal opportunity to participate. I think that's clear. I think there was some slightly different exchanges of views about how we achieve that, but I think everybody is very much up for a full debate and full participation on this one. So we move forward to item number 5. Number 6 even, yeah. Oh, still on 5, sorry, I do apologise, yeah. Okay, thanks. Hang on a second, I'll just get my agenda dropped there, sorry. Okay, hang on a second, sorry, where were we? Oh yes, spotlights on scheme of delegation and decision-making improvements. I do apologise, members. Did you want to pick that up, David?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Scott. As part of the Scott's presentation, just thought members may find it helpful if I did a little focus down on the scheme of delegation and decision-making element of the constitutional review that we're undertaking. So we've undertaken a survey of senior officers and also of the executive on this theme. Since vesting day, as MO, I've had quite a bit of informal feedback, principally from officers, about decision-making and scheme of delegation and what works, what doesn't work, where the frustrations lie, hence why this is one of the areas of focus for the review. So to support that work and to get a bit more flesh on the bones of those sort of anecdotal feedback that I was receiving, the survey was issued in August, September. So this is just an opportunity for the committee to see some of the feedback they've received as part of that.
Thank you very much, David.
So moving on, we received 57 responses from senior managers to that. The little table on the screen there shows the split within directorates. So good responses from Climate and Place and Community Services and Resources and Corporate Services, less so from adults and from public health, although since this report was written, we have had some further feedback from adults, so we do now have some good coverage across all of the directorates. So the first question we asked was just a simple opening gambit of, are you familiar with the Council's decision-making process, guidance and report templates that can be found on our local intranet? So you'll see that the vast majority were either fully aware or partially aware of that, which was encouraging to hear. Second question was, do you feel empowered to make decisions within the Council? Again, partially and yes was the majority, but quite a good chunk actually said no to that question. So we need to drill in a little bit further into that. So the next bar chart that you can see on the right-hand side is what are the reasons for this? So coming out top was problems with the decision-making process, closely followed by sub-delegations to you from your executive director or service director are unclear or not in place. Other areas that were not, which were mentioned, was a basic lack of knowledge, or a majority of decisions are taken by members and have not been required to make a decision as yet. So there's quite a spread there of reasons. Feel free to move on, thank you. In terms of the sub-delegations within their service, so the gift is there for exec directors and service directors to issue sub-delegations to their individual officers. So we just wanted to query as to the kind of awareness levels of that. So again, basic question, are sub-delegations set up within your service? Again, yes, coming out reasonably strong at 20, but a big chunk not sure. That is a little bit of a concern, because the way the template works in terms of sub-delegations, once any director gives a sub-delegation to one of their officers, they should be informing that officer as part of that process as to what delegations they have. So that's a piece of work that we need to pick up on. Again, drilling a bit further, are sub-delegations effective? 5 coming out yes, no one said no, again, but the vast majority were partially, again, which suggests a little bit of more work and clarity we need to do in terms of officer awareness of how the sub-delegations work and what sub-delegations do exist. Next slide. So we then went on to ask about key decisions and the financial threshold of £500,000, asking officers whether they thought that was about right, or too low or too high. As you can see, vast majority think that's about right. 36 out of the 57 responses, with a chunk sort of sitting on the fence and not too sure. We then went on to ask about the decision-making process and the sign-offs of key decisions. So a number of sign-offs are required in order to provide assurance for those decisions. So various senior officers or exec directors, service directors are required to sign off on the decision report. So the question related to that process as to whether or not the format as it is just now provided that correct level of assurance. So very few thought the level of assurance needed to be increased. A reasonable chunk thought it was about right. The majority thought it should be decreased. I think more coming out of, and I think the next question asked about reasons for that response. So move on to the next slide. No, it does. So we did drill down a little bit into that, and and I think it more or less stemmed from frustrations about the time that it took, seeking that multiple officer or senior officer sign off for the decisions that are required to be taken, and the delays in decision making that resulted from that process. The sort of final round of questions was about level of knowledge and training requirements. So do you feel you understand the information process and steps required to seek approval for a decision? Again, majority was yes, with a good chunk again in the middle of maybe, with very few coming out at no. And the final question there, sorry, just click back for me, please. Thank you. Oh, too far. That's it. Do you believe that a mandatory training session on decision making would be beneficial? So yes, virtually everyone said either yes or maybe to that. Only one person said no. We'll find out who they are and have a word with them. Moving on to the next slide. So the final 3 slides is just a collection of. We got a lot of narrative in terms of the responses to the survey, which is really helpful and really useful, because often those kind of boxes where you ask, would you like to provide any more details, they're left blank. That certainly wasn't the case in the survey that we did. So just some of the themes that were emerging was around subdelegations and the wish for officers to have more subdelegations and be more empowered to take decisions, and acknowledging that those officers have that level of expertise and knowledge to allow them to make those decisions. And alongside on that slide, some frustrations about the delays for the sign-off process in terms of reports. Move on to the next slide. Again, the sign-off process, observations about the sign-off is fixed in terms of the number of people required to sign off reports, and sometimes their area of knowledge, expertise or representation is irrelevant to the decision that's been taken. There could be a report on a disposal of an asset that requires sign-off from the Director of Workforce, and there may be no HR or staffing implications at all to that decision, but yet they're still required to sign it off. And the final slide, again, just some of the commentary and narrative that was provided. Some commentary on the size of threshold of key decisions, taking inflation into account. Thought it should be higher than the £500,000 that it is just now. Generally feels about right to some. Needs to be appropriate to the grade for the decision making and accountability for the officer that's taking the decision. So again, having the ability to flex the thresholds depending upon the level of officer that's taking the decision in that regard. So that generally it was really reasonably positive on the thresholds that were in place. And I think that might be it. So just next step. So we've got I think we've got a workshop on Friday actually to do some more in-depth analysis on the themes and the feedback that we've received. We'll do some more work on that, pull out the themes, pull out the feedback, get the main areas that we need to focus on in terms of the review of the Constitution and decision-making process and the scheme of delegations, and then through that develop and implement any proposals for changes and process. So we'll need to get executive buy-in to anything that we bring forward and propose, and wider member buy-in, and we'll bring it back before this committee with the hope that any changes that we do propose will ultimately go to the next annual general meeting of full council and be signed off at that process. So that was just a kind of whistle-stop tour through the survey and the kind of work that we've been doing, specifically in relation to scheme of delegation decision-making process, but hope you found that helpful and happy to take any questions.
It's really interesting data in there, David. Thank you. Simon Carswell.
Just an observation. We've got 57 responses, and perhaps a couple more have come in later. We don't know how many that's out of. And also, the number of responses, say, for instance, Climate and Place 22, that might be 100% of managers and directors replying, whereas Children's and Family Services and Adult Services, I'd imagine, have got a lot of managers, and yet their response rate is, as a percentage, is particularly low, probably, but we don't know how many out of each of the figures are.
It's a fair observation, and we deliberately left it open to the recipients to cascade the survey down to their decision makers. So the survey went to all the service directors and all the exec directors. So that's 25, 30 individuals that went to directly. And then from that, the service directors and exec directors were asked to cascade it down to their managers and their decision-making managers. So some, I'm sure, took a very proactive approach to that and sent it to, you know, a dozen, 20 managers within their service. Others may have focused on one or two where they thought the major decisions were being taken. So that, in some way, explains some of the discrepancy or gives a bit of context to the discrepancy. But fundamentally, you're right, as in that it wasn't a blanket survey to every officer who could potentially take a decision. We started at a certain level and asked them to cascade down to their decision makers.
Simon, you want to come back, don't you?
Just come back quickly. I suppose that raises a question, is whether the service directors, executive directors, are allowing, ironically, their managers to be part of the decision-making process. And therefore, those managers might say, well, we couldn't really respond on how the decision-making process was made because we weren't given the option of making that decision or feeding. It's an irony there in a way.
I think some of that has come out in respect of the answer regarding subdelegations, where there was a lack of awareness among some officers as to the subdelegations that may or may not be in place. So yeah, I think that's something we need to delve into a little bit further in terms of ensuring that we have a correct record of subdelegations that have been put in place, and also in awareness raising for senior managers to ensure that they're using their subdelegations appropriately and where they need to be, and giving them the ability to do so, and that awareness around the process.
John Bailey, then Dawn Johnson.
Just a comment, in my experience of team briefing cascading, when you get a poor response, it's often a reflection of the manager's poor ability to cascade stuff down to the organisation. So it's a reflection of, which I think David was saying a few moments ago anyway. So it's almost blinded by the fact that things don't get cascaded, don't get delegated, and therefore the survey process doesn't work very well either. But that's only my experience.
Dawn.
Yeah, I'm just got a curiosity about the threshold of greater than 500,000. To me, that still seems a lot of money, especially given the current economic climate. And how long has that figure been at 500,000? How far back does that figure go? Have we ever investigated changing that level of threshold? Because I think I would prefer to see that a bit lower given the current economic climate.
That's the threshold for a key decision. That doesn't give delegation to an officer just to take that decision. It just is whether or not it's considered to be a key decision or not. Being a key decision introduces an additional level of sign-off and assurance compared to a non-key decision. In respect of timings, it's been in place since 1st of April. The threshold within the districts tended to be lower because they were dealing pre-vesting day, because they were dealing with smaller beer in terms of the project and finances. Scott, threshold for former county council?
That was set at 500,000 probably about 10 years ago, over a decade. We've annually reviewed that, both in the legacy councils, but also clearly as part of this process as well, just to make sure, is it still fit for purpose? Should it be reviewed either downward or upward? And I think you're getting some views as part of this survey from some of the officers. But again, yeah, there's a part of this process which also involves clearly the members also forming a view.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just the members' views. I think it's part of the public and our residents who know that we are in a very challenging financial situation, and they may want to feel that more decisions are being properly scrutinised.
We will certainly take that on board. I think there is a variety of opinions from what we've seen just from officers about where that threshold should be, and I'm sure it will be different amongst members. But we'll, as Scott said, traditionally we do that review annually as to whether we think the threshold is right. And just sort of reiterating the point, that's not a financial threshold where decisions are just taken willy-nilly. It's where it's considered to be a key decision, and part of the key decision definition is not just financial, but about whether it has significant impact on constituents and two or more of the areas of the council. So there's a number of boxes to tick as to whether or not they're considered to be a key decision, not just a financial threshold.
Shilcott.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the paper, and I've been involved. We've had lots of conversations over the years about key decisions. My experience, I suppose, as a councillor is often officers don't understand, especially if they're new into a role and perhaps it's the first one they've ever done. There's a key message here saying that almost everybody believes that there should be a mandatory training session, so I think that's a learn from what we see here. But I think, moreover, what I would love to see is when you have got the standard form, there's little information boxes. We do it on lots of stuff online now that says, you know, these are the things to check. Have you done this? And I think that'd be really helpful to officers so they're all following. For me, there have been several issues with key decisions. The first one is you have a number of sign-offs. Sometimes they'll get stuck with one person, and you'll see that a sign-off might have taken 30 days to complete, and then everybody has to be rushed through in the last 24 hours to sort of hit the deadline. So I think that's a cultural issue, so we need to follow these through and make sure they're not blocked on the way through. I think there's a really good point on multi-year contracts. I think at the moment it's the total value, and if that's a 5-year contract, it might only be for 150,000 a year, which is a small figure for the council. So I think there should be a piece of work around multi-year contracts so that we don't sort of bung the system up with sort of relatively small decisions. Picking up on the point that Dawn made, and actually one that Councillor Carswell made in another session, is in the event of a 114, that's been spoken about and voiced in several areas. What would happen to the scheme of delegation? What I'm trying to get at there is, in that event, is that lowered dramatically? And if that is the case, that would seem a strong case, given our financial position, to bring it down. I'm not saying we should, but I'm just trying to understand the process, and should we jump ahead of that because of our financial pressures? And I didn't see anything about or reference to that here, but I think it is relevant. Thank you, Chair.
I don't believe there'd be any automatic trigger on thresholds as a result of 114, but what the 114 does do is stops all non-essential spend, and then it'd be up to the organisation itself to introduce its own mechanisms and checks and controls as to how any spend gets authorised as a result of that. So, as in a roundabout way, there would likely be a change in the thresholds, but it wouldn't be an automatic one as a result of the 114 notice.
Richard Wilkins.
Yeah, I was just looking at the sort of awareness empowerment charts, and my question is: have you sort of broken down with the Cascade situation? You know, do you know that, you know, perhaps some of the higher level officers would be more on the yes side? Do you have those figures in, you know, somewhere in amongst your?
Not to hand, but yes, within the information and the detail that sits behind the survey results, yes, that's all there.
So you have an understanding on where the issues lie, you feel?
We can drill down into that, yeah, absolutely. We've got the data to do it. I don't necessarily think we've analysed that data to that extent yet, and to see if there is any correlation as to what you suggest in respect of the officer and their opinion as to empowerment. But we can certainly pull that out.
We'll have to drill down.
On Teams, we've got Tessa Munt wants to speak.
Thank you very much. I was just going to make the observation that quite often there is a delay, and there's a delay because lead members might have questions. And so, for example, I know that this morning I've delayed something by 3 weeks because there's some legal matters that need to be clarified before I feel I'm in a position to make a particular decision. Now, that decision is shared with another member of the executive, but I would just say that delay isn't always a bad thing. It just means there's a bit of thinking going on, a bit of clarification going on. That was going to be the point I made. But thank you for looking at this. I think it's a good thing. And I think probably, I can't remember, it might have been Dawn who mentioned it, and forgive me if I'm wrong. I don't wish to offend the person who did if it was someone other than Dawn. But I think actually at a time when we are looking at being incredibly rigorous over how we spend taxpayers' money, I think it's very, very important that we get this right. And I think Scott mentioned that there'd been a long time, you know, the decisions, the thresholds are reviewed every year and they've not changed for 10 years. I'm not entirely sure that now would be the time to change them, bearing in mind what we face, what all councils face in the way of financial, we're in slightly straitened circumstances, let's put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. Mandy wants to come back.
Thank you. Something we haven't touched on, which I know has been an issue in the past again, is confidential appendices when they're attached to key decisions. In the past, on some occasions, a lot has been put in a confidential appendix, and actually quite a lot of it probably could have been put in the key decision, because if it's not contractual or, you know, it's something we can share. So I just wonder again whether there's a piece of work around sharing whatever can be shared and not just blocking it all into a confidential appendix. I know in the past a lot has just sat there, and I have felt quite strongly it is information that all sorts of reasons could form part of the key decision. So I wonder if that conversation's been part of this piece of work.
Not directly as part of this work, but it is a fundamental principle that I want to pursue, that as much of the detail and information that can be shared is shared and is as transparent as possible. And it's only if that information meets the confidentiality test that it should be in the confidential appendix, not through a matter of convenience to keep it all together in a single report. You know, that public-facing report should contain as much information as it possibly can.
I really welcome that, thank you.
Unless there's any other further questions, I don't have any hands raised on Teams or in the room. Are we agreed to note that report? Thank you. It was really interesting data on there. I'd like to spend some more time actually going over some of that. I do like my sort of stats and information like that. So with that, we move on to item number 6, which is the report on the launch of the Somerset Council electoral review. This is something which we knew was coming when the Unitary Council was set up, and we vested in April 22. We always knew that there would be an electoral review taking place, which will take place in this quinrennium, is it not quadrennium? And there was an all-members briefing which is taking place on the 7th of November. But just to launch that in, David's going to give us a report on that. We also have one of our Steve, one of our electoral services managers, who is in the room to answer any potential technical views. So this is just to really report information about the launch of this electoral review and the process around it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so it's just to bring members up to date on the process, provide as much information as I can at this stage. You should all hopefully have received an invitation to an all-member briefing on the 7th of next month in Dean House. And that will be a presentation from the commissioners themselves about how they will want to engage with the authority and members and officers as part of their electoral review process. But I thought it was just worthwhile for me to bring this before you today, just to give you a heads up really on the process and the procedure that will be being followed. So we all knew this was coming as part of the Somerset order. We all knew that there would be an electoral review within the county in advance of the next planned elections in 2027. It's probably come a little bit earlier than we were anticipating, but that's within the gift of the Commission themselves. So they have let us know that they intend to, well, they have already commenced that review. They've put a few dates in the diary. They've had a couple of initial meetings with myself and the leader and chief executive. Just at that final bullet point of that first slide, just confirming that with 110 members, Somerset Council is the third largest council in the country. So just after Buckinghamshire and Durham. Sorry, bear with me. I'll just try and sort that out. Right. There we go. Problem solved, hopefully. So yeah, just that last bullet point, just to confirm, we are currently the third largest council in the country, and if we do a peer comparison with similar sized councils from a geographic and electoral roll perspective, we're probably looking at somewhere between 70 and 90 members in that kind of ballpark. The Commission have confirmed that there is no threshold that they apply in terms of member numbers, or the only threshold they apply for a council of this size is between 30 and 100. Is what their guidance would say. So as you can see, it's quite a broad spread. He said problem solved. There we go. Right. So the electoral review, what will it consider? So firstly, it will consider the overall number of councillors. It will look at the overall number of wards and divisions, the boundaries of those wards and divisions, the names of those wards or divisions, the number of councillors elected to each of those divisions, i.e. single or multiple councillor wards, and the building blocks for the review will be the existing city, town and parish boundaries. After this work is complete, there's probably going to be a further task, hopefully post-2027, where we'll do a full community governance review, where again we'll look at the building blocks for city, town and parish boundaries, but that will not happen in advance of this review. So 3 statutory criteria that the review needs to consider. So electoral equality is the first one. That's the general principle that each councillor should represent the same number of electors. And this shouldn't just be focused on how the populace is as today, but forward look as well, up to 5 years. So if we know we've got a number of housing developments coming online where the population of a certain division is going to increase significantly, then that should be taken into account in terms of the electoral equality figure. The second criteria is community identity and interests. Again, identifying where there is a shared sense of community and how it's reflected in the ward and division boundaries. So looking at schooling, shopping habits, places of worship, use of facilities. Again, if there's a common access or there's common facilities to a certain populace, then that should dictate the identity and lead and influence the ward boundaries. And the final point is around convenient and effective local government. So again, strong and identifiable boundaries with ward names that are recognisable to the local population. What the review will not take into account, it will not take into account the political consequences of boundary changes, it will not take into account parliamentary boundaries, and it will not look at the overall size of the council area and boundaries with neighbouring councils. So they are not on the table. So there's 4 distinct phases I've been informed about as part of the review. So phase 1, which we're approaching just now, is establishing the appropriate number of councillors for the council. So this will be done through consultation with the council itself. And the feedback that the commission, they're willing to receive multiple feedback from the council. It just doesn't need to be one single corporate response. It could come from member working groups, it could come from political groups, it can come from individual members as well. And ideally, from their perspective, they do want that variety of feedback to come to them. But those numbers or that feedback, that consultation response, needs to be informed. So why have you come up with this number? It's not just a number of convenience. How does this number influence the way that the council operates, the council is governed, and how does it best represent your population? So that phase will be around 3 to 6 months. Phase 2 is then when we move into warding arrangements, and that's when the public engagement starts. So there'll be 2 community consultations, and again, each consultation lasting about 10 weeks as part of that. So again, we start with a number of councillors, and then we look at individual boundaries for wards and divisions. Phase 3 is when it goes to seek parliamentary approval, and phase 4 is applying the changes which will be in place for the next Somerset council elections in 2027. So next steps, as I mentioned, we've got group leader and then all member briefings for the 7th of November. Again, as I said, the Commission will welcome multiple responses on the review. That third bullet point, so a thorough review should have a broad rather than a narrow approach and should be taken as an opportunity for a necessary conversation about the councillor role, with a view to concluding whether the council size is appropriate given the roles that members play. So this work again can play into the wider review of governance or a more general review of local democracy in terms of the number of committees we have, what role and responsibilities those committees have. One of the commissioners in one of the early meetings I had made the point that it's about being an effective councillor, not a busy councillor, and that's where the number should arrive from. The areas it should cover, again, the following key substantive areas around the wider national and local policy context. How is that impacting upon Somerset? How does that the local and national policy context inform how many councillors are required and the division of boundaries? Obviously, local geography and demographics, the role of the councillor within the council, the role of the councillor within their community, and the role of the councillor within other institutions such as outside bodies and partnerships. And the final point there is around how does technology and the use of social media influence the role of the council? Has that relatively recent development changed the way that councillors work and communicate with their constituents? So spring-summer next year is when the Commission will receive the submissions on the number of councillors. Later that year, receive submissions on boundaries, and they would aim to publish their draft recommendation in May 25, and then again their final recommendation in August 25. So there is a little 2-minute video which I wanted to show you that the Boundary Commission have produced. I'll need to come out of slideshow view to do that.
Good luck with this one.
I know.
This is the thing, always panics me when I have to show a video. I like to put it in the chat sometimes with a Teams meeting, and when somebody asks me to play on the main call, I really start to panic. There's always somebody, there's issues often with sound, isn't there?
No, it's not video of me. No, so. Right.
Bullets in the movie.
Let me just pause that just now. Go back to slideshow. Share the screen. coming through speakers or just?
Just yours. If you've got this, there's a button on there where you share the sound.
On
you go into Teams. A lot of things in life, it was good while it lasted. No, okay. So really, really serious. And I've got Peter online. I'm going to call him in a moment. I've got a couple of people in the room. I really like trying to get people to, I know this is a really exciting subject, and I know I get really excited by this, but try and focus our comments and questions on technical questions regarding the process of this. I don't want us to get into a very long debate now about I want 38 members, I want 95, and this village would fit much better in a better electoral division, and I can't stand the name of my electoral division, or something like that. Just try, because there'll be ample opportunities during the next 18 months or 21 months to have all those wonderful discussions, and we'll get much better guidance from the we'll get good guidance on the process from the commissioners on the 7th of November. But just try and focus today just on process questions that David can pick up, and Steve, our electoral services manager, has with us today. First, Peter Steve's been waiting very, very patiently online to speak.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can.
Sorry, you can hear me now, can you?
If you could just introduce us for the purposes of anybody who's joining us, Peter, that'd be great.
Okay, I'm Peter Sieb, Brimpton and Chilthorne Derma fall within the Brimpton electoral division. There are 2 points which I think need early engagement with the commissioners because given the nature of the council that we've got, we would want them to be taken into account in their review. The first one is an equalities issue to do with Section 50 of the Employment Rights Act 1996 and the concept of reasonable time off. Somerset's a particularly large county, and so in taking up duties as a councillor, you're required to travel some distance, and that is part of what the employer and the employee relationship being affected by being a councillor. That's part of the considerations of that. Just to give you guidance, the civil service, for example, allow 18 days as a standard councillor's reasonable time off. So you can take up to 18 days before they start to become a little upset with you. The reality is we have a vast majority in Somerset of people who are employed or are in, and some of whom are in micro businesses, which are particularly adversely affected by somebody taking up the role of councillor. But really, it's incumbent on us to try and make sure the council is balanced by a mix of people representing the society that we, as a council, are trying to represent. And I think that it's worth raising this at an early stage with the commissioners, asking them to consider that when they are considering the workload that results from any decisions that they may make. The second point I wanted to make is to do with parish warding. One of the consequences of a boundary review, the last boundary review at the district level, was a number of directions made as to the warding of parishes. Now, for many parishes, this is appropriate, particularly the very large town where the town council is a giant parish council. However, for the vast majority of Somerset parishes, warding is not appropriate and is actually a fairly evil thing when it operates. I have a very, very small sub-ward within my electoral division, which belongs to Yeovil Town, which is particularly subject to what I would call entryism, people spotting that nobody has stood for the area, which only has, I think, 26 households. And so they automatically come through to the town or parish council because nobody else has stood for that very, very small and poorly related ward. And I think the other thing that members need to be aware of is that once a parliamentary decision has been made on the parish warding, it can't be challenged or changed for a fair period of time. I think it's 5 years, which means that to carry out the necessary local governance review it is put off for an entire council, and you simply can't make any progress on what may be extremely sensible things like taking the little arm that I referred to out of one parish and putting it into the one for which the majority of the ward represents. So I think both of these are matters which really want to be addressed right up front at the very beginning of the process to make sure that they're clearly understood, that we value the fact that we've got a council which at present can be open to many within society. We don't want the council made up entirely of people who are financially independent or retired. We want people from across society in the council. And secondly, we should have an early dialogue about reconsidering the parish warding, which was made at earlier stages of review in the various districts, because it adversely affects the ease of administration of councils, and it also adversely affects the politics at the parish level. Those were the 2 points. Thank you.
David or Steve, who would like to try and pick that up and respond to that? I mean, a lot of this stuff is really, really pertinent, but it will be picked up in the terms of the process of review. But any sort of question or comments you have, Steve?
Thank you, Chairman. Stephen Lake, Electoral Services Manager. If I can pick up the parish warding issue, because it happened at the last county review that new wards were created in parishes, and they were very small wards and very small parishes, particularly around Frome. And they do create difficulties for the parish council when it comes to the 4 yearly elections, because they are so small that the parish probably only had just about enough people to stand in the first place, and maybe not even that. And the wards can lead to electoral problems, as that we will have to possibly rerun an election because there's nobody standing. And it can create contests in one of the wards and nothing in the other. So it can create considerable difficulties for parishes. And of course the cost of running 2 separate elections rather than one adds to the parish costs.
This is an issue that the commissioners, Peter and others, will be able to make these well-made points, and then they'll be picked up during the terms of the review, during the process.
Yes, Chair, they can certainly make those comments. The problem with creating these small wards is to get the numbers to balance.
Okay, thanks. Richard Wilkins.
Yeah, picking up on Peter's first comments, really. It's about the fact that we're the third largest council, and you said comparably we would be between 70 and 90. Can you just sort of break that down a bit? Because, you know, how large are we in the sense of area comparably, and in the sense of population? Because obviously those are 2 different areas. And also, could you tell us about the councils that are the 1st and 2nd and 4th and 5th, and how successful they are, and where we would slot in the 70 to 90 zone, and how successful the councils around there are, because there doesn't seem to be much work on that as far as I can tell.
Again, points which I think are a really good question to bring up. They have the meeting on the 7th of November. It's been an excellent question. But Steve, do you want to respond to that?
It's very difficult to respond to that, Chairman, because I don't know how you judge how successful a council is. But electorate-wise, we're roughly the same size as Cornwall, which is 430,000 electors. And Cornwall has 80 members, if that helps.
And interesting, I think, just to add to that, before Richard comes back, Cornwall was set up in 2009, and when they had they had 123 members when they were first set up, and then when they had their electoral boundary review, then it went down to 80, didn't it? Yeah. 80, it's 87, is it? Yeah. And I think Wiltshire, which was also set up, and then I think they're about 96. I think they were over 100, weren't they? 98. Yeah, they're 98 now, are they? Yeah, they were probably slightly over 100 when they went down for the first boundary. And this is not to frame what is to happen, but just a bit of background information. Richard, do you want to come back?
Yeah, that's numbers, but population. But what about area?
Geographical area, yes. Square miles, yeah. Again, be a really good question to ask the commissioners, that would be, yeah. But again, there's some good stuff going on here. Dawn.
Hi, mine was a question regarding the phasing, and I'm a little confused how you can determine the number of councillors before you look at the wards. So phase 1 is looking at the numbers, and phase 2 is looking at the boundaries or the wards. What would the criteria be then for determining the numbers of councillors? What is part of that process if it's not based on the areas that people are representing?
The Commission are very keen for the Council to establish their number of desired councillors based on what councillors are required to do, and the local governance within the Council. So how many committees, how those committees are empowered, how an individual member can contribute to those decision-making processes, and then moving on from that, they also want to look at the wider role of representation as well as regards population. So there are some rough thresholds in terms of electorate size as to what they would consider to be an appropriate number of electors for each member to represent. I think that ranges round about between 3,500 and 5,000. That is generally the number for a unitary council. So the combination of those two analyses will help to inform what the authority deems to be the number of councillors required in order to serve both the council and their constituents.
So I think Helen wanted those numbers repeated if possible. So if you're looking at the number of people they represent, that's almost ward and boundary sizes, isn't it? I can't see the separation necessarily. What would be the decisions that are different from the ward decisions then? If that makes sense. So the ward decisions are based on numbers presumably as well?
Yes, and based on number of electors, but obviously we have different levels of population density as well, as regards a much more rural population, perhaps in the east of the county, compared to the more urban-centred focus around towns like Yeovil and Taunton. So there needs to be that balance in terms of the number of electors that each member represents.
I don't know if it's me, but I'm really struggling to see how that is a separate consultation from the ward boundaries. They just seem to be so interlinked that I really can't quite appreciate how you can do one without the other.
Sorry, I think Steve and both Scott can assist me in this one.
Well, once you've determined what the number is, according to the criteria that David has explained, you can then create, and we've been talking about warding parishes, etc., areas which match the number that you need to get back to.
And this is really good. These are good questions, and Steve and David are really fielding them fantastically. But a lot of these questions, we'll be able to get more detailed answers. They're questions which we need to put to the commissioners. So, but that doesn't mean they're not relevant questions, because they most certainly are. And I'll be really interested to see how the commissioners try to field these questions. But very, very good. Emily, Scott wants to come in. Yeah.
It's only just to expand on the points made. I'd probably suggest a more fundamental question as part of the review when looking at ward boundaries will be the fact that Somerset has 55 two-member divisions. This electoral review we need to consider is a two-member type arrangement, what Somerset would like to see continue, or are there different boundaries based on single-member wards? So that's one of the other considerations, and that's why it's done separately in terms of that sequence.
So this framework is determined by the people running the review.
Emily.
Yeah, lots of questions. Is there a quick answer to are Buckinghamshire and Durham having a review themselves? First one. Do you know?
Buckinghamshire has had one.
That's
in the past.
So they're not due one?
No.
Okay.
I don't know about Durham. Yeah,
I don't get a written answer. That'd be interesting, though. I'd find out where Durham is with that.
Considering, given what Peter said earlier, I'm also, and I don't like making things about money, but we're at 110 members. We want to go down a lot. They've had a review at 147, and their remuneration currently is 13,300. So how is it that that particular council can justify so many councillors, and we have to reduce down quite considerably given the expanse of the county and what it costs to move us all around, even though there'll be fewer of us?
just for context, Buckinghamshire Council, like Somerset, was created by virtue of becoming a unitary council. So the number of councillors was defined in its structural change order, very similar to Somerset's, where we couldn't quite get to a position with the civil servants in terms of what the number should be. So the civil servants went for a very simple methodology, which was we'll take 55 and multiply it by 2 as an interim position. I think the thing to bear in mind as a consideration as part of the review, perhaps not is necessarily Buckinghamshire or Durham. I think we may need to be more guarded or aware of the fact that the LGBCE will probably be looking much more at Cornwall's more recent review out of the list, going down to 87. And I'd probably suggest our comparator, and also thing to watch, is the fact that North Yorkshire, who were on the same timeline as us, is the single largest geographic authority area, bigger than any. And as part of its unity process, North Yorkshire went to 90. So I think one of the things for consideration is the LGBC will probably be looking at what they consider to be comparable former shire areas and what numbers they're operating at in terms of numbers of electors per councillor. So to be alive to that. Buckinghamshire and County Durham are useful yardsticks, but they've not been subject to an electoral review, whereas certainly Cornwall has, and more recently, back in 2017 from memory, Wiltshire has, and Wiltshire went down to 98 as part of that process. So I think we need to be mindful of perhaps our more closest comparators. From the Boundary Commission's perspective, I know it's been made as part of the presentation, but I think the thing we all need to be very mindful of is this is the LGBCE's review. We are consultees. This is not our review.
Good point. I think it's got well made. I think they're probably, I'm guessing they probably look at the comparators, the Somersets, the Dorsets, not the Dorsets, the Wiltshires and the Cornwalls. But it's an interesting question about Emily. On Teams, Sue Osborne.
Thank you very much, and interesting presentation and debate. Are the questions that we are asking today, are those going to be put together and submitted to the Boundary Commission in advance of the members' briefing? So those questions and answers can be covered off as part of that briefing. So we don't necessarily have to go and ask the same questions again. That's my first point. The second is, what evidence do the Boundary Commission actually look for in arriving at the numbers of councillors that they feel this council is going to need? So what evidence are they looking at us to provide to support a particular number? And if we disagree with the number that the Boundary Commission come up with, can it be challenged? And if so, how would we challenge that?
Obviously, want to comment on the process questions that Sue has made there, but particularly regarding in terms of can there is any potential challenge to any size of the council the commissioners may come up with, and also will these questions be collated and put to the commissioners before the meeting?
We can certainly share the minutes of this meeting with the Commission in advance of the 7th of November, not putting too much pressure on DS officers to complete the minutes before then, but that's certainly something they can do. As regards to what information the Commissioners are taking into account, and they want to hear from us, you, officers, political groups, as to what you feel is the appropriate number, but that shouldn't just be a number plucked out of the air. That should be a number based on evidence of, you know, how many councillors do you feel or we feel the organisation requires in order to function appropriately? How many councillors do we feel we require in order to have an appropriate governance structure within the council? How many councillors do we feel we require in order to provide that to reflect the local and national policy context in terms of the priorities that there might be within Somerset? So all that feeds into the answer to which we'll arrive at and feed to the council. As term in respect of the ability to appeal, I do not believe there is, but Steve, do you have any further?
I would say you could probably only do it by judicial review, and that would be an extremely expensive way of going on.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't know if I missed it, David, but maybe you said it already about what is the average number of councillors for a unitary, average number of electorate for a unitary council. I was just interested as that as a baseline. And that was my first question. The second question is that I was an officer at Wiltshire when we went through unitary and we did this boundary change review in the transition year before vesting day. And the way that it was conducted there was they also looked at super output areas and the primary care trust areas and all these other boundaries as well that they took into account to make sure that they were all coterminous, a bit like when we had the LCN discussion. So some of that will come up again, no doubt. But at the end of that process, I think we had 2 or possibly 3 options which were circulated, and I just wonder if we're going to have something like that, or as somebody else just said, or if it's something that we are being invited to be consultees on, and we will not have any say in that final discussion on the options. Thank you.
It's very much the Commission's decision. So we can feed into that as part of the next phases in respect of warding boundaries rather than councillor numbers, but wards numbers and ward boundaries. That's part of a public consultation. So there'll be 2 public consultations as part of that exercise. In respect of the number of councillors, that's just directly with Somerset Council, albeit, as I said, that can come from there can be various responses to that. So we have the opportunity to feed in directly to the number of councillors in terms of number of wards and the boundaries of those wards. We are part of a wider public consultation as regards the feedback process. In terms of numbers, I'll get some more detail to you, but from memory, I think that there is no average because there is quite a lot of variety existing within the country, but it does range from something around 3,400 up to near 5,000 per councillor.
Can I come back to you? Is that including district councils, or is that just for unitary?
I believe that's unitary.
Okay, because I know I was told not to mention individual things, but we've currently got nearly 14,000 in our shared ward, so we've got shared division, so we definitely need to have our area looked at.
And one of the parameters of the review always is to try and find electoral divisions, wards which are of a similar number, and also to project on what those size of those wards and divisions might look in 5 years' time as well. I've got everybody down on the list, I promise you. John Bailey's next.
Thank you, Chair. John Bailey, member for Martock. This is the reason I came today, because I'm not able to make the 7th of November, so I was interested to catch up. And I was, for my sins, around at the 2013, which was the last time it was done. And I just feed in 2 sobering comments which were my 2 punts of feedback back at the end of the process. One is that it is political. The political parties have their own views about what the numbers should be, so please don't get misled by that comment. And secondly, and this is particularly important in these straitened times, it was a huge waste of time and money, really. So on that sobering note, you're given the process. David's laid it out. That's what you've got, and you have to work within that.
And John raises the point. Members of the public, community interest groups, and political parties are people who can submit their own submissions to the Boundary Commission, and very often do. But obviously the Boundary Commission and it's, as David pointed out in the review, are not allowed to consider political ramifications when they look at the review, and they were trying to base their decisions based on community issues. But that doesn't stop members of political parties or political parties per se making their own representations, and they often do in this process. Tim Curley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really want to get hung up on Buckinghamshire, but I think we do have a concern for this particular committee going forward. Our constitution has been largely based on Buckinghamshire's because it was a large unitary and it was a new unitary. Is there a danger, if we reduce too much, that we end up with the wrong constitution? Thank you.
David. Constitutionalist.
I mean, hopefully the whole work that we're doing around on the previous item on the constitution review is always about making sure that your arrangements, your democratic arrangements, your constitutional processes all remain fit for purpose in terms of your current circumstances. So should, hypothetically, there be a reduction in the number of councillors, again, it comes back to, again, making sure around, does the constitution need changes to still allow for all of the key statutory functions and duties to be undertaken. So those can all be accommodated as part of a review. But no, the constitution shouldn't necessarily dictate the number of councillors. The number of councillors is driven through a whole different process around really, and it was on those slides, trying to achieve electoral equality.
I promise I haven't forgotten anybody who wants to speak. I know some people have been waiting an awful long time, but we have already had 18 members who are speaking on this really, really important subject, so I promise I haven't forgotten anybody. I'm trying not to forget anybody. Theo Philip online wants to...
Thank you very much, Chair. Just very briefly, to looking at the Buckinghamshire and Durham examples, I've just been looking at the Local Government Boundary Commission's website. They've both just recently completed their further electoral reviews, and Buckinghamshire is coming down to 97. Durham is coming down to 98. So that should give a fairly good indication of the sorts of numbers we could be looking at.
Interesting. Thank you, Theo. Dawn Johnson.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to know how much work this review will require of the council, given how much we have going on at the moment. And is there any funding support for this work, or are we expected to fund officers to do this work? And I see they say that they will respond or have a recommendation by August 2025. What work does that require of the council from that period on to implement it?
David?
Taking your second point first, if I may, in terms of what work does the council required to implement the boundaries, that will all be in the lead up to the next election, so the next 2027 election. So again, registers and boundaries and polling station review will all fit into that process. So that will be the main bulk of work to implement the boundary review decision. In terms of your first question, no, there's no funding that comes from the Commission to support this work. It's up to the authority to engage proactively into the process. We need to support everyone who wants to respond to the consultation in terms of councillor numbers needs to have access to the same amount of information, whether that's on population densities, existing ward boundaries, whatever it might be. So what we'll need to do is to collate a kind of a repository of information that any member can access, whether that's accessed through a group, through a working group, through a political group, or through an individual. So that's the main bulk of work that we'll have to do as officers to ensure that you, as members, if you wish to respond to the consultation, have access to all the information that you need to facilitate that.
Martin Lovell.
Yes, Martin Lovell, Shepton Mallet. This is really more a housekeeping question rather than what we might present to the Boundary Commission, but also because of the clash with the Shepton, the Planning East Committee, I won't be able to attend on the 7th of November. I'm just conscious overall, I mean, I'm not against what's being proposed, but we're going down from however many councillors we had in district councils to 90 or whatever it is that we are now. I'm very conscious that the greater part of the inquiries I get from division members is asking me to point people in the right direction for services. And the reason they have to ask me the question is because the situation is so opaque, they can't find it out for themselves. I think in the process of doing this, we need to be looking at the transparency and visibility of what the council offers, so that anybody inquiring doesn't go frightened, oh, I better go to my elected member, can actually see it for themselves. That's the point I wish to make. Thank you.
Just going to come back to Sue, and I think I'm going to close it after that. It's been a really, really, Richard. Okay, Richard, and then Mandy. Then I will close, I think, because we've had 21 contributions. Very important, but there's lots of these questions that only the committee. It's really good to be out at this, and I can see the way this is going, which is fantastic. But a lot of this stuff is technical stuff, which really good questions for the commissioners. But Sue Osborne, you want to come back?
Hi, thank you for indulging me, Chairman. I really appreciate it. One observation I would make from our experience in South Somerset, and possibly your experience with the parliamentary, is the ability of the Boundary Commission to throw in what I would call curveballs. For example, in South Somerset, they created a 3-member ward out of what were 3 rural divisions. Nobody asked for it. Nobody wanted it. I think concerns were expressed. The Boundary Commission stood firm, and we got lumbered with that. But no one could see the logic or the thinking behind it. Certainly not those of us that were closely involved. The other example, I think, was when at Christmas the Boundary Commission were going to add Bruton to the new constituency of Frome. We spoke against that at Constitution and Governance. We were given all sorts of reasons why it couldn't be changed. And then, thankfully, someone saw sense. And when the final map came out, Bruton was replaced back with Wincanton, which is where it should have been in the first place. So I think we do need to be aware of curveballs being thrown, and possibly what tactics can we have as a committee, as a council, as members, to make sure that that doesn't happen and we don't get sort of unexpected surprises.
Sorry, yeah, I think most things have been said now. You know, I mean, it's just feeding into the Commission and trying to do it as cheaply as possible, I think.
Mandy Chilcott, and I will close it after that.
Thank you, Chair. Having been through this already once with Somerset West and Taunton, I think it will be very enlightening when they come and speak to us. My recollection of the time was, I think there were 3 options presented to us. Councillor Pugsley might nod, yes. We were given 3 options with so for this council it might be what 80 looks like, what 85 looks like, and what 90 looks like. That's what we were presented with. And it was, another recollection was, it is purely a numbers game. They have to get the numbers sort of equal, and they did not include rurality in it. Stephen's shaking his head because I remember having the conversation well. So I think in reality options will be limited. I think we can be consulted, but what will be will be. And just to put some context with Cornwall, I'm a Cornish gal, so end-to-end Cornwall, you're looking 2.5–3 hours from one extremity to the other, and it's taken me 2 hours to get here today. And it could go further if next time's at Shepton Mallet. So I think in travel times, we won't be the only county with those challenges with travel. So I think we'll all hold on to our hats and see what happens. The only comment I would make on the preference was very, very much last time I went through this on single-member wards. They did not like multi-member wards, and that was made very clear to us when they gave their first presentation. So I'm very interested on what they will say this time. And the final comment is, if you follow the history of this over a number of years, the amount of residents per councillor has gone up and up and up and up. My final comment was, there was a note on there about social media, and whether you're a councillor that gets involved in social media or you do not can make a huge difference to, 1, your workload, and 2, the amount of time that it takes you. I know for me, it takes me an inordinate amount of time. It's the right thing to do, but if you don't do that, that can really change the dynamics of what you do and how much time it takes as a councillor. So I don't know how they will measure that. I'll be interested to find out.
Well made, and a good place to finish, really, because I think there are lots of things. And undoubtedly, even with the best intentions, if we get the most fantastic review, at the end of it, there will be some concerns about some of the names of the division and certainly some of the boundaries of the division. I know my own large rural division has some some interesting ones. We did a walk from Rewishton School to Monkton Heathfield School last Wednesday, and I was very well supported by Tessa and Richard and Edric and a number of members and Dixie Darch, and trying to explain to them actually walking the ground that Rewishton, the village of Rewishton, was not in the same division as Creech St Michael, which is next door to it. We walked from one village to the other, but it's in an electoral division with parts of Wellington. 10 miles away. So there will be these, however you like it, it's an almost impossible job. They will come up with some proposals which we will not be entirely happy with at the end of it. It's a very brutal process. It's a necessary process, part of the vesting order, and it's going to be very, very interesting. And I think there's lots of food for thought and lots of potential, lots of questions which we will put quite rightly on the 7th of November, and be really good, as Sue said, we try and collate this stuff and give them forewarning of some of these questions, and perhaps they can come forward with some potential answers at that briefing as well. Thank you. It's number 7, which is the work programme. Just inviting any comments we have on the potential work programme. Bandy.
Sorry, Chair, indulge me, slightly off the work programme, but we are here today, which for me has been a very, very long trip, I have to say. And I'm just comparing it with the Audit Committee conversation, because with the Audit Committee, consideration was given to moving around the county. An email went to all members of that committee. We then discussed it in audit, and actually, because of the average travel for members of the Audit Committee, the committee amongst itself decided they should actually stay in Taunton, and that included the public attendance was very low, which it also is at this committee. So I'm just wondering, when we move forward, can we consider putting it back in Taunton, please?
It's a point well made, and I know Stephen made some points, and I'll take that on the chin as the chair. I had extensive discussions with officers on this. I personally are very keen to move the committee round the county, but I accept, for people who come from West Somerset, it's an awful long way, and it's also a long way from people who go to Frome to Taunton. There are different opinions on this, and so what I was planning to do, and I accept my opinion on this is not the same as many others, and I've had a difference of opinion from different members. So what I would like to do after this, really to generate, I don't really want to have a public discussion on streaming on this, because I think it would be extremely boring for members of the public to watch about how we had discussed where our committee meetings take place. But I think there's a genuine discussion there, and I really would like some feedback from members of this committee and members in general, what they think about moving this committee meeting around the county. And I do take on board what you said, Mandy, and I'm not decrying the fact you've had a very long journey, and thank you for making that. Helen.
I'll reserve mine to speak to you about it privately, but it was on the same issue. Yeah.
Any other members wish to make comments on any issues regarding the work programme? Helen.
Sorry, separate thing. Going back to the last point, the fact that it clashes with a Planning East meeting, the workshop, can we feed in any questions to, would it be David or Scott before that workshop, if we've got anything that we wanted to raise? And will it be recorded? I assume it will be recorded. The workshop on the 7th of November, because it clashes with the Planning East meeting. And Barry is also in that meeting, I think, too.
Yeah, we were aware of that clash. Unfortunately, we were kind of dictated by timings, calendars, commissioners' availability, room availability. So it was an imperfect solution, but the best we could come up with. But yeah, absolutely. If you've got any commentaries that you wish to make in advance of the meeting, then yeah, send them to me.
Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the interim review of the LCN terms of reference. Will there be some pre-consultation prior to that? It's on the agenda for the 31st of January.
That timetable will largely be dictated by the LCN team, so we'll have some conversations with them imminently about where they are in respect of their review and position, and we'll feed back to the committee about any lead-in that's required, as whether or not that date changes. But it's on the forward plan at the moment. I need to have a conversation with the LCN team to ensure that we're not blindsiding them if it's out of kilter with their own review.
Members, are there any further comments on the work programme? If not, Bandy, sorry.
super quick. We've talked today a lot about the Constitution, that review piece of work. Is that actually what's coming back in April, the first year review of the Constitution? So presumably, I think it said full council in June, did it say? May? Okay, thank you.
Any questions raised? I formally close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.